you know. Record book is very, very important and integral part of research, you know. And what is this? Record book I'm referring to? So, record book. The purpose of maintaining a record book is to record from day one to day last. The day you perform the last experiment for your PhD, everything what you do in the lab in terms of experimentation and things like that. So you have to record everything. I will come to those specifics in a while, but the purpose of record book is to maintain a record of your activities, you know. Why you need to record or keep this because, you know, as I told you, it takes nearly 5 years, 5 to 6 years somewhere in biological sciences, particularly to finish PhD. Now, after finishing your experimental part, when you sit down to write thesis in terms of material methods, in terms of your results, you know, you will definitely, as a human being, will forget what you did 5 years back for the first experiment if you're not recording properly everything what you have done for that experiment. Okay, so therefore, first of all, as soon as you enter in a lab, your mentor will ask you to have a record book. So purpose is, as I mentioned, is to record each and everything, the small to big things on that day when you are preparing for the experiment and then conducting the experiment and then concluding the experiment. Okay, so what all we record in a record book, for example, which is very, very important, is that first you should write date, you know, which date you are starting the experiment. So date of the experiment, and then the objective of the experiment, specific experiments. In fact, even before you start that, before doing all this, you should first write in detail your major objective of the work, you know, broad objective, to then specific objectives, okay, and then plan of work, you know, which, see, this plan of work may change time to time, but when you are starting, what are your major objectives? What are your specific objectives? And then what is the plan of work? What kind of experimentation broadly you plan to conduct? You know, so all this needs to be recorded in the first place, and then after you have written all this, then comes the experiment one. You know, in experiment one, what I was telling, that you should put a date of the experiment, planning. You know, first you are planning an experiment. So in that plan of experiment, you have to write, just like you record in your practical notebook, class practical notebook, you know, you must be preparing a notebook for your regular practicals. So what you do there, you write an objective of the experiment, you write the plan of the experiment, then materials and methods, etc., and you go on. Similarly here, when you are about to perform an experiment, so from planning to execution, the execution is conducting the experiment. So in that, so objective of the experiment first, and then plan of the experiment, how you want to organize that experiment. If suppose a culture has to be grown for 24 hours, you write culture is to be grown for 24 hours. After that culture, what you need to do. So that is what is known as plan of work. So after culture has grown for certain period of time, you isolate bacteria, and then you isolate plasmid. You then digest the plasmid. I'm just giving you an example. So that is what is known as plan of work. So after objective, you have to write the plan of experiment, and then comes the materials and methods. What materials you require for that experiment in terms of chemicals, in terms of glassware, plasticware. You can mention that very briefly, and then the the after conducting the experiment, you have to write the observations, what you observed. Okay, so those observations have to be written very clearly, either in the form of table, if you have collected data in terms of numerical data, of so then you have to write that and make a table and write clearly. And or if you have taken a picture, then you paste the picture there, you know uh, and if some figure is to be drawn based on your data collection, then you draw the figure also, and then you have to write what is your inference, what conclusions you are making about that experiment, and towards the end, you have to write the sort of uh, after inference, you have to write the conclusion. Now, this conclusion will be the continuity hint for the second experiment. In research, this continuity of experiment is there. You perform an experiment which leads to a second experiment, and the second experiment leads to third experiment leads to fourth experiment. So there is a continuity of the in the work and experimentation. So it is very important that you conclude the experiment towards the end, and when you go to the second experiment, you have to take the hint from the conclusion that, okay, in that experiment we found this, therefore the second experiment is objective is this, okay, to explore it further. Each experiment, when you conclude, leads to another question, and that question becomes objective of the second experiment. You will realize it in when you enter, some of you, in research, that in research, that is what happens, that one experiment leads to another experiment leads to another experiment, like that. So this process continues until you meet your objectives, what you have set out for yourself in the work, so even before that, as I was mentioning, that you have to write the plan of work, and objectives, specific objectives, and after that, you must write all the protocols which you plan to follow in the immediate future. All the protocols of the experiments that will require methodologies. If you are going to, for example, isolate or grow bacterial culture, you write how you have grown the bacterial culture, what kind of media you have used, how long you have grown, under what conditions you have grown. Everything you record as a prelude to experimentation. So what I discussed earlier will follow. But after recording, making a record of objectives, broad objectives, specific objectives, and the plan of work, then comes the protocols, which you are going to follow immediately. And this will keep on changing as you go along. Once one set of objective is complete, where you have used one set of methodologies and materials, which you have recorded here, when you move on to second objective, then you again write the major objective, the major protocols to be followed, major materials to be used, etc., etc. So from each objective, so it change. I mean, before starting a new objective, you have to state everything in the record book. You know, don't show laziness in that. This is my sincere suggestion to those who will be coming for research, that it is very, very important aspect of research. You know, even after PhD, if you are going for postdoc, uh, I can tell you that if you go to postdoc or even pre-docs now in India and postdocs, whenever you are leaving, you have to leave your entire data book original to the lab. You have to give. And abroad also, this is very, very strictly followed. Whatever data you have generated, the original data books are to be given to the lab. You can retain a copy, a Xerox copy of the entire book, you know, not the original. Original remains always with mentor in his lab. The reason for that is that if anybody questions who performed the experiment, where is the raw data, and things like that, to answer those questions at a later date, even when you publish and leave the lab, the mentor should be able to show, okay, this is the actual data, raw data collected. In papers, research papers, what you see is a processed data. You don't see raw data there. But this raw data is required to support your processed data if anybody questions at any given point of time. So therefore, uh, you know, uh, please make it a habit to record everything, small to big.